Okay, welcome back. This is the seventh video going through reviewing the midterm exam. Last part we were talked about part 8 and part 9, the drawing out design concept part, and part 9, the short paragraph answer. Before that, I went through the comparison questions. And one of the reasons why I'm going through those slides really fast is just to make sure that the program, the video recording program, is up to sync with me so that it sees where I am. So at this point, I'm going to go through the slides of the extra credit identifications, some of which were ones hopefully you knew, and some were ones that maybe were a bit of a surprise, but you could have done well in all of them. Once again, I'm not going to go through everything, because the information is right there. St. Francis next to see Bellini 1480. So that's there for you to see. I'll mostly just kind of say what things you might have said about this work. Obviously, the most important thing, or not most important, but the quickest thing you could have said right away was this is a painting. It's an oil painting on panel. And we have talked about it in a number of ways. We talked about it in terms of how the geometry of the page reinforces the narrative, right? The way like the corner to corner diagonals, right? And how like this makes an arc and that makes an arc, and the whole thing feels like, right? It's the corner corner diagonal is a representation of the divine, and the divine line is going right through the heart of St. Francis. We talked about the religious narrative, the idea of a religious image representing the moment of being transfixed, the moment of connection with the divine. We talked about how it also functions as a landscape with kind of a visual pathway, and that visual pathway going back into the space also tells us part of the narrative about him being in the wilderness, removing himself from society, but also it shows us what he left, the city and the power and the wealth. Okay, that's a lot. All right, painting from the Wall of Lions. It's Paleolithic. And so some of the main things we talked about was how we call cave paintings paintings, but really you could see this as much as a drawing as it is a painting. And it's also in some ways a lot like a work of sculpture because there is carving that's going on here and building up of plaster that's going on here as well. We also talked about what is some of the possible meanings here, like why did they make these images? And one of the major hypotheses is that these people were making these images as kind of a form of ritual magic where they were sort of trying to envision a good hunt or kind of represent themselves in the act of hunting well. And that may also possibly connect with notions of tribe and totem kinship, right? Where, it's possible that some of these ancient people saw themselves as being totemly connected with certain animals, right? So that maybe the people who made this particular image saw themselves as being connected to lions, and so when they made images of lions hunting, it was an image also of them hunting. We don't know that for certain. That is just a possibility. Now it's possible that the repetition of these figures, of the overlapping and the repetition of them, is designed to kind of create the idea or the imagery of movement, but it is also possible that this comes out of just the natural process of people painting the same wall over, hundreds or maybe even 1,000 years, right? Painting the same wall over and over again, and some paintings fading and some paintings need to be put back in, and then the whole cave being sealed, and then we see all that stuff later. We don't know. But you could put all of that into your answer. You could have gotten even more extra credit. Okay, another statue of David. We have three main statues of David that we have looked at a lot in this class. And this is the one by Bernini. So it's an example of Baroque sculpture. It's reductive sculpture in that it's carved marble and it's freestanding and it's in the round. In fact, I would argue that it is fully in the round. It creates these very interesting negative space volumes, like this space in between his arm and the sling and his body. And it really, because it functions very much like a spiral, it really kind of leads us to walk around it and see all the angles of it. And it's a very, just an amazing, beautiful sculpture. So there's a lot to say right there. Okay, Sistine Chapel. Number one, it's an example of fresco painting, and you could talk about what a fresco painting is, how it works. Like mentioned, the fresco painting is you paint directly into wet plaster, and then the plaster itself becomes the binder of the paint. And you could also talk about how Michelangelo approached the problem of fresco, the fact that it is, by its nature, it wants to be painted in section by section, because you can only paint on the wet plaster one bit at a time. And the way he solved that problem was, kind of as a design problem, was to break up the painting into all these little tiny vignettes. So it's both this enormous large whole painting, and it definitely functions like a large whole painting in some ways in terms of the repetition of color and the repetition of shapes. It feels like a whole, but then it's really lots and lots of small paintings. Not small, and many of these are like, these are large figures, but small compared to the overall size of the ceiling. And so it's a good example of vignettes and of paintings within paintings, what we call space cells, right? And anything else I want to say? It's also a good example of trompe l'oeil, right? Where there are parts of this painting that are designed to look like the architecture built into the wall, even though they're not. Okay. Flaying of Marsyas by Titian. It's an oil painting, and it's late high Renaissance. Like I mentioned before, Titian lived well into the Mannerist period. He was kind of the last great painter of the Renaissance, and so the story here is of Apollo flaying a competitor of his. They had a music contest, and Marsyas, unfortunately for him, lost. And for those who don't know, flaying means the removal of skin. So he's flaying the loser of the contest. So Apollo is not a pretty, well, he's attractive, but not a pretty god in many ways. And so why is this painting important? Why is it one that I return to a number of times? Because Titian in his late career really started embracing this very, very loose gestural manner, where painting in a very kind of free gestural hand, and then in lots of layers, with thin layers of paint over thicker layers of paint. And that became extremely influential on many later painters, not just painters in the Baroque period, but all the way to the 20th century. It's one of the reasons why Titian is so well admired and so looked at by painters, of just about every period, is because he very much made these about the act of painting. They're very, very gestural and very painterly. Okay, number 6, and I think this is the last. So the Diplon Amphora. So it's an example of ceramics. It is Greek, right, of the Archaic period. It is from the geometric period of Greek ceramics, so it's geometric style. And this is the style that came before black figure. Actually, the style that comes in between geometric and black figure is the Orientalizing period. But this is geometric style. And one of the things that's interesting about the geometric style is that, as different as this looks from our overall history of Greek ceramics, as different as this looks from black figure and red figure pottery, in some ways it does have one aspect of it that's very similar, which is it's decorated overall, but then it has these kind of windows where there is narrative, where there's a story being told. And this is a scene, let me get my cursor back, a scene from the Odyssey, just like many other vessels that we've looked at. So there's a continuity to later Greek ceramics as well. All right, I think that's the end. Okay, I'm going to end there, and I will see you in the last section, which might be part 8.